You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey Doctorow,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Blind, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
George Kramer.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in to Author Stories. You can find all of the archives of the show over at hankgarner.com. There are handy links over in the sidebar on the right-hand side where you can subscribe to the show. You can find all of the archives in a handy little drop-down list, or there's a search bar where you can search for your favorite author and see if they have been on the show in these past more than 400 episodes. Thank you to our sponsors for allowing us to do this. And we've got some new sponsors coming on. Daniel Kinney, my favorite middle grade author, is just doing amazing things right now. He is publishing like a madman, but he's putting out excellent books. I buy his books for my nieces and nephews all the time. My kids are a little older now, but my nieces and nephews, I buy Daniel's books and put them in their hands. They are top shelf quality and really fun books. There's a link to Daniel's Amazon page in the show notes, and we're going to be highlighting more of his books as we go on this month. But go visit Daniel Kinney and buy his books for your favorite kids, and they will love it. Roy M. Griffiths has a new book, Bringing the Fire, The Lonesome George Chronicles, Book 2. Roy is really doing some amazing stuff in speculative fiction, and we're going to be highlighting more of those as the month goes on. But go pick up Roy's newest books. There's a link to it in the show notes. If you're a fan of alternative history or war and military thrillers, you're going to love these books. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, thanks to my buddies Nick and Jason from Galaxy's Edge for sponsoring the show. Thanks for tuning in. As always, at the end of the show, we have an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series. He enlisted for the money. He stayed for the girl. Gateway to the Galaxy, the new series everyone is talking about, beginning with Book 1, Into the Breach. Frank and Marine Space Corps 1 find themselves across the galaxy in a WWE smackdown with the legions of a boss-level villain. But the party's just getting started. He donned the mantle of a celestial knight to impress a girl, well, an empress. Now destiny's calling in a debt. A lightning-paced military fantasy full of outlandish comedy and impossible situations that will have you hailing for these Marines from the get-go. For fans of Green Lantern and the Stargate universe. Listen to what some readers are saying. This is good stuff. Thanks for the new obsession. I recommend and can't wait for the next book. And the visual pictures and action are amazing. They're getting the band back together, and this time, it's serious nonsense. Pick up the Gateway to the Galaxy series by Jonathan Yanez and J.R. Castle, available now on Amazon.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. Gateway to the Galaxy. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have George Kramer on the show with me right now. George has a couple of books that are fantastic that I've had the chance to read, and we're going to talk about a lot of other stuff that he's done. But his newest book is called Blind to Blood 2, and he also has another kind of sneak peek project that he put out that we're going to talk about later. But welcome to the show, George.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm glad to have you. We begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, I was in fifth grade. I was born and raised in New York, and in fifth grade, there was this teacher, Mr. Irwin, and he was reading Treasure Island with the pirate accent. And I grew, I don't know if I want to use the word bored, restless, and that was pre-computer, so I had a pen and paper and I started writing. Interesting take on that too is because by the time I was 16, I had 2 novels, plays, short stories, and I left them on my bookshelf. And I got into an argument with an older brother, and he threw everything out, and the garbage came that day, so I lost everything from my childhood.
Oh, man. Yeah, a lot of kids, you talk about their mom throwing out their comic book collection and how devastated they are later in life. But to have novels and plays and short stories that you've written, things that you created, that had to be devastating.
It was. It still is.
Do you and that brother speak to one another?
Oh, yeah, we're all close. Yeah.
Well,
he doesn't even remember doing it, but I remember.
But you will never let it go, will you?
Right.
Oh, man. So 5th grade, it was awakened in you because of that teacher. Did you show any of the things that you wrote to that teacher?
No. I was extremely shy until I moved to Indiana. I came out of my shy shell in Indiana. All throughout my life, I was very, very shy.
Wow. So you started writing stories. What was it? Just that teacher that actually brought life to the story? Do you think that's what kind of awakened the thing in you that, stories can be exciting? They can be more than just, drudgery.
I agree, Hank. And take, for example, a friend at work. He asked me to read some of his writings. So I did. I said, this is good, but it's a narration. It's not fiction. He goes, well, I don't know how to write fiction. I was like, oh, man, take a clock on the wall. It starts going backwards. Why? You have a yellow chalkboard, a yellow chalk. It writes green on the chalkboard. Why? There's billions of things you can write about.
Right. Yeah, I talk to people all the time, and, that dreaded question that no writer ever wants to get asked is, where do you get your ideas from? Because ideas are everywhere. It's just a matter of, like you said, take an odd observation and then let your imagination go wild.
Yeah, I have an overactive imagination, I'm told.
Yeah, I do too. I think that runs in the writer family.
Yeah.
So you were in high school when you had written all that stuff that your brother threw away?
Well, from 5th grade to high school, yes.
Wow. Wow. So what kinds of things were you writing?
Well, I loved the TV show MASH. So the acronym was MATE, M-A-T-E. I just can't remember what it was about. I mean, the acronym, what it stood for. But it was about a mobile unit, doing surgeries and stuff like that. And then the novels, one novel was The Day Kids Took Over the Schools, and the principals were on it. And I loved Star Trek, so I wrote space navigation.
Nice. That's a pretty broad range of stuff from MASH to Star Trek. I loved those shows too when I was a kid. And that's one thing that's always bugged me about the publishing industry and the kind of the machinery around writing and publishing is that writers are a lot of times expected to, especially when you have something that's really successful, is people don't want you to change what you write. They want you to keep writing the same more and more of that thing. And I understand that it's a necessity to, for people to find you and all of that stuff. But, writers are just like readers, and I don't read the same genre every day, and I don't write the same genre every day. There's, we're three-dimensional people. We love all sorts of things.
I totally agree. I just don't read fantasy. I have not read fantasy up until a couple of years ago. It was mostly science fiction. But what's interesting about what writing, because with the Arcadius books and the Blind to Blood books, I have a female fan base that said, put a love story in it. So I'm like, so the next book I'm going to write is like a murder mystery with a love story. And one of my friends says, oh, I've got to see this.
That'll be great.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Arcadius books.
Well, like I said, I've never read fantasy until I published Arcadius Prophecy in November 2014. So up to then, I've never read fantasy. And I read my first fantasy book. Well, actually, it started out on Netflix. I saw the Dresden Files from Jim Butcher. I liked the TV series, even though I didn't think Harry Dresden should have a hockey stick for, But anyway.
They took a lot of liberty with that TV show.
Yeah, so I was like, oh, they're based on books. So I started reading them. I started reading Kevin Hearn. I was like, wow, this is awesome. And you know what? I can do this, but I just don't know what. So the way my mind works, I keep it in the back burner, and then something will come up. So a couple of weeks later, I was at my triplet sister's house, and she was painting, and she had 3 cans of paint on one side and 2 cans of paint on the other. And I said, what are you doing? Why is this paint separated? She goes, well, you got the primary colors here, red, blue, and yellow, and you got the secondary colors, orange and purple. And bang, my mind realized, hey, that would be a perfect story for sorcerers to be based on their colors.
Nice. So did you then develop a magic system based on that?
I did. I address it later on in the books because someone said, well, how do you know which one's stronger, red, blue, or yellow? And then in book 5, I addressed that. But the secondaries are like when a red-powered sorcerer marries a blue-powered sorcerer, a green-powered baby is born, and they're considered secondaries, not as powerful. So I address the lack of power in colors in book 2 because they feel like they're not being treated fairly, so a war erupts between the primaries and secondaries. And Hank, in each of those books, there's a message. The first one and the second one is like, I don't care what color you are. I don't care who you are. We're all equals, and I try and convey that in all the books.
Nice. So that simple interaction with your sister and the colors, and all of a sudden this story just starts unfolding in your mind. How long did it take before you started working on that story?
Immediately, my wife and daughter were gone for that particular weekend. So I know we go by word count, authors, but for the general layperson, I wrote 70 pages in the first day. It just flew.
Wow, that's epic. When a story just jumps alive like that, that's you got to get to the keyboard or to the notebook or however it is that you get it down. That's turned into a 5-book series, 6-book series.
7.
Wow.
Hank, I was going to stop at 6, and I went to a couple of book signings, and it's for 10 and over, and several teenagers and several parents were like, well, where's the 7th book? Where's the parents said it. So I wrote the 7th, and now people are asking for the 8th, so I don't know. It'll be a while, because in all the books, twice I put Arcadius in a situation where I have no idea how to get him out. He will die, so I have to rewrite the scene. So I'm at that point where I don't know how to get him out of book 7. So I'm just going to, like I said earlier, put it on the back burner. When it comes, it comes.
Nice. So shifting gear, well, first off, when was that the first novel that you published, was the Arcadius Prophecy?
Yes.
So when you finished that book, what did you do with it? How did you decide to get it out to the world?
Well, first of all, I wanted a trial audience, and I work at a large hospital in Indianapolis, and I told them about it weeks before it was published, to build up momentum. So by the time the first books were published and mailed to me, most of those copies went to people at work. And when they told me they liked it, that's when I started doing book signings. I wanted them as a trial run.
Nice. So, so you started locally and kind of building. Did you get feedback from readers? And was it all encouraging? Did after that initial feedback, did you go and change anything in the book?
The initial feedback was totally positive.
That's great.
Yeah. The thing is, I may go back and change it only because the first book is 28,000 and change words, and that's considered a novella. Yeah. I want to make it a novel, so I may go and beef it up. But the thing with Arcadius is it's sequential, so something in book 4 would mention something in book 1, book 2, so you have to read all of it. I like that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. After publishing that first book and getting it out there, did you have the second book working already?
I had the concept. Oh, wait, yes, because I had the concept, but I started writing it because the best 3 words in each of those Arcadius books are, the last 3 words are to be continued. So on the second book, I started immediately where the first book ended.
Nice. So it's just this one big, huge continuing story.
Yes, through his trials and tribulations.
Nice.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I write it because I read Jim Butcher and Kevin Hearn, and they write in first person. I decided to write it in first person, and I infused my oddball sense of humor. And people that know me, who read whether it be Blind to Blood or Arcadius, said, "George, I see you in those books."
That's the best, isn't it? I love that. So this was your first experience writing fantasy. You said you weren't much of a fantasy reader until you discovered, some of the new urban fantasy. But this was your first hand at writing fantasy as well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Was it? I know you said that the pages just flew by. When that story concept came to you. But do you think by shifting gears, moving to a new genre, do you think that opened up your creativity to maybe, because when you write the same kinds of things for a while, you tend to get comfortable with your own style. You tend to, I don't want to use the word formula because that has a negative connotation, but I don't mean it negatively. You learn who you are as a writer, and you have some default places that you go to. Did writing fantasy help to stretch you as a writer?
Yes, because I had wanted, see, in my opinion, science fiction and science fantasy differ. With science fiction, if you go to a planet, you have to explain the ship, the propulsion system, the atmosphere of the planet. But with fantasy, you could stretch your imagination. You could talk about cats shooting purple trees out of their eyes, and it's okay as long as it's relative to the storyline.
Right. Yeah, I'm writing that down. I'm going to use that somewhere.
But what was interesting, Hank, is when I switched gears, it was not difficult for me to switch gears, but I noticed a change in Arcadius when I started writing Blind to Blood, because I actually pierced my dark side to write that.
Right.
So I found in book 7 that Arcadius, the storyline was a little more darker. And I found that very interesting. I was able to see it, take a step back, like introspective, and see the change in Arcadius.
Wow. And we're going to get into Blind to Blood here in just a minute, because that book blew my mind. But let's talk for just a second about your did your writing process change when writing Arcadius? Or do you still write the same way you've always written? Are there any tools that you use, or any things that are different about your writing style?
Well, I think it has certainly developed, but what I like to do is I call them insertion points.
Okay. And
in every book in Arcadius, I insert something that's meaningful to that story presently, because there's a lot of subplots going on. But I can also use it later on in another story if I'm like, well, what do I do here? I'll reread some of the stuff. Oh, that's a great point from the insertion point that I can build in the other story.
Yeah, for sure. So you had fantasy was new for you. What were you writing before Arcadius? Were you writing stuff that's like Blind to Blood? But you said that you kind of tapped into your darker side. What was your default genre before that?
Actually, poetry. I had 2 books of poetry that I just recently published that's been around for years, because I kind of go into a trance when I write, and the poetry is totally unconventional. It's heart-wrenching and thought-provoking. It's not. Some of the poems are like, hey, the wind rushed by my hair, it's a nice day, but ultimately, I think you need to say something when you write. Not that that's not saying something, but I like it a little deeper.
Yeah. Do you feel like poetry allowed you to? Do you think that writing poetry affected your fiction writing? Do you think it strengthened it? Do you think it just allowed you to do something completely different that then allowed your fiction writing to be more energized because you give your brain a rest? Do you feel like that? Because they seem very opposite. But, as we know, doing opposite things a lot of times strengthens the other thing, for whatever reason.
Well, it did not affect my writing process. It affected my creativity process.
Okay.
Because,
how so?
Because, when I wrote poetry and I wrote something, I was like, that is pretty cool. What I wrote can represent something to me, but something totally different to someone else. It was just the words I used, because I love a play on words.
Yeah. And
I use that in my poetry, so you can get several different meanings out of one line. And that's basically poetry is just the interpretation. So
then learning those little tricks and the little twisting words, playing on words, that can show up in your fiction writing, and you don't even know it. And then you look back and you go, wow, that was a great turn of phrase. I wonder where that came from.
Exactly. Some of those phrases in the poetry books I still use.
Nice.
To this day. Yeah.
Nice. So you've got the 7 books in Arcadis, possibly 8. You said that you switched to your darker side for Blind to Blood. I'm picking up threads throughout your story. You loved MASH as a kid. You work in a hospital now. I didn't know that, but that becomes you can totally see that now. What's the genesis of this story, and what was it that excited you about the idea?
Okay, first I have to clarify something, and it's my bad. I wrote the original Blind to Blood in 2009 when I was still procuring tissue, but I sent it to an editor, and it was 501 pages. I remember that. But the editor said, George, I have a criminal justice degree. 90 to 95% of your police procedure is wrong. You need to rewrite it. Well, I was not rewriting it. There's no way I was rewriting 500 pages. So fast forward to after I published the first or second Arcadis book, I just happened to mention, I work in the surgery department in Indianapolis, and I just happened to mention to people that I wrote a book about tissue procurement, and they all know what that is. And I said, but it was 500 pages, and I can't do police procedure. I don't know how to write the book without police procedure. And again, I put it on the back burner, and I was talking to somebody, and they just said something like, well, just have them write a journal. And I don't know, an epiphany occurred. If I wrote a journal, I can make the character after all those events occurred, where he's in an insane asylum, and I don't have to put any police procedure in it.
Right, that's genius.
So that's how my mind works. So I wrote that. But as I try and tell the general lay people, well, just people outside of the medical field, I should say, organ donation is when someone is alive, although they're brain dead and cardiac time or death, all that. I can get into that. But tissue is when people die. So even though the heart and the skin are organs, when someone dies, it's considered tissue. So I surgically removed body parts, if you will, for donation, which I really enjoyed for many years. And I figured at that point, fantasy, you don't have to write what you know, but in the medical, you have to be really accurate. So I wrote what I knew.
And you play on a very primal fear that a lot of people have. We talk about organ donation when you die, and getting having the notification on the back of your driver's license, and we all hear these wonderful stories of people's lives that were changed because someone donated their organs, and one person passes away in a car accident or something, and then another person's life is saved, and it's this beautiful story of the human condition working together in this weird way. One life taken is one life given. And it's this really weird but uplifting thing. But the fear of that is, what if I'm in the hospital and I might not make it, and they see that I'm an organ donor, so they just don't give me quite the quality of care that maybe I could, because maybe they don't think I'm worth saving, and my organs would be better with someone else. That's a very real fear that a lot of people have, and you kind of take the joy of that and the fear and just turn it on its head.
Well, I can understand that, but it's an unfounded fear because...
Of course it is. Yeah. But it's something that a lot of people have.
Right. And I thought about that, especially with tissue. With organs, it's 1 for 1, the pancreas for pancreas, heart for heart. But for a tissue, you could save up to, well, not save, enhance about up to 50, 60 people's lives on one full donor. So it is a very noble field, and I addressed that in the dedication, like, this is a noble field. I just took it and put a twist on it. Consider donating, because it's a great thing. So that was one of my fears, that people will say, "Oh, I don't want to donate." Well, donate.
Right. Oh man! So where did the idea for the story come from?
Okay. I was in southern Indiana with my wife, daughter, and mother-in-law at a water park. I don't like water parks. It was hot. I was annoyed. And they just said, go back to the hotel. Just go back to the hotel. We don't want you here. I was like,
you're ruining it for everyone, George.
Yes. So I went back to the hotel room, and I'm sitting there. I was like, well, what do I do now? They're going to be all day. And I was doing tissue at the time, and I just thought about, I need to write something. And I always bring a notepad and paper wherever I go. So I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to start writing and see what comes up. And the original Blind to Blood. I don't know where it came from, Hank. That's how my mind works.
But you got the idea popped in, and you just started chasing the story down on the page?
Yes.
Speaking of that, are you a plotter or a pantser? Do you plan out your stories, or does a character come to you and you start following them around? What's that creative process in your brain like?
I create the character and follow him around. And because of that, what I have to do is, every time I finish a scene, he may take a divergent path to what I originally wanted the character to do. So I have to reread what I wrote to make sure I fit in a storyline or change it. I've left it alone. As long as it's cohesive, I'm fine. I don't want this loose, non-intricate plot going on.
So what's the basic premise of the book? We're talking about a tissue procurement specialist, but what happens in this book that kind of turns it on its head?
Okay, Ben, the serial killer. By the way, the first book, that cover, was done in my house. Behind that, those people, my friends that are posing for me, is my couch.
Nice.
So I needed a reason why the serial killer was going to procure tissue from people. So I decided to create an ailment in the person. It's not necessarily an ailment, it's a birthmark, but you can't do anything about it. So I created this kid that was born with a yellow and brown discoloration from his head down to his toes, of yellow and brown, and his father abandons him. His mother starts to drink because it's an abomination, his dad called him. But he gets bullied, and they throw water balloons with diluted mustard at his house, because that's the color, yellow brown is mustard. And he begins this path of hatred towards humanity. And then he's in the ER with his mom, stuck in the ER, his mom. He didn't want to be there. He didn't like his mom. But he sees 3 people coming up with a cart, and he talks to one of them, and they find out about tissue procurement. So he lies his way online and he gets an interview and gets accepted and all that. But in real life, you have to go out 3 times before you, quote unquote, cut. And he finds that he has natural proclivity to it. So after 3 years, everything's fine. He's more of an adult now, but he gets an anonymous email asking if he can procure for this clandestine organization. He assumes it's a third world because they don't have the same standards as we do. And he said, sure. Well, he said, I can't, when I do a recovery, a procurement, and bring it back to the office, I can't take anything. I mean, this is true. This industry is tightly regulated by the FDA. You cannot do that. So he says to them, I can't do that, but I can get people off the streets if you want. There won't be any medical questionnaire, medical history. There won't be any blood, which is a major thing for a recovery. I mean, I go through the steps, and they said, sure. So unbeknownst to them, he does it while they're alive because of the hatred for the humanity. I built it up for that.
Nice. So you've got this really complex character. What was your fascination with serial killers?
The fact that they actually want to kill another human being, without remorse. I mean, I can write about it, but I would never do it. There's just that separation, and they don't have a separation. As a matter of fact, I read a little bit about serial killers before I wrote this, and it said one of the main commonalities all serial killers have is they started torturing animals when they were kids.
Right.
But I didn't have Ben do that because I didn't want that.
What do you think because when you're dealing with a character like this, he's unlike any character you've ever written, probably. Yes. Was that in the same way that we've talked about shifting gears, poetry to fantasy, science fiction, and all of those things, beneficial to the writer by letting you get into a different creative space? Do you think that writing a character like that, who is so obviously different from you and different from any of your friends and family, and but when you get into a place like that, something that's such uncharted territory, it really does let your imagination go wild, doesn't it?
Yes, and it was fascinating to me how I can go in Ben's mind, do all this stuff, come out of his mind, reread it, and I was like, holy crap. Yeah, it's very interesting. I find it very interesting.
What do you think that having a character like that, did it just remove all restraints from you because a character like that is unpredictable, and you can't say, well, this character can't do that. It would be outside of his normal character. Kind of all bets are off when you're dealing with a character like that, aren't you?
Yes, and that was actually kind of liberating, not in a bad sense, but with Arcadius, I can't have him do stuff that's outside of his character base. I mean, you can stretch it, but you Ben is so far removed from Arcadius. So it gave me a lot more liberties where I was like, well, he can do this. He's messed up in the head. I don't care. But, and it ended up being very interesting. And just in book 2, Hank, what was interesting is one of the doctors I killed off came to me prior to that, the book. He goes, look, I want to die with dignity. I was like, doctor? Serial killer on one hand, dignity on the other. They're not equal. He goes, you can do it. So I found a way to do it, and he finished it, and he goes, George, this second book is less technical, but much more descriptive. It's rare, but I actually like it a little better than the first book. I was like, well, I had to create more of a storyline because you only do a certain amount of tissue. So I had to create scenes. As a matter of fact, I talked to a spine surgeon because I was doing something to somebody, and the spine surgeon said, George, that won't work. You got to do this. So because I wanted it medically accurate, I had the limitation of the medical accuracy, but I had the liberating factor of him being able to do it.
Right. You've got this character, Ben, who's a complex character, to say the least. Tell us about this email that Ben gets and how this changes his life.
Well, the email was in passing, and I did that on purpose. I didn't go long, involved process of the email where he thinks about it, he dwells upon it. I put it short and sweet to augment the point of his character, his personality. Hey, someone wants me to procure body parts outside of the tightly regulated industry? Okay. There's no filters. There's no stopping. So that's why I purposely made it short and sweet.
Right. But what does that do for Ben? Does that open him up to possibilities he's never thought of?
Yes, because at that point, he still doesn't really get along much with his coworkers. He doesn't fit. But he loves but that's where the tussle, the dichotomy comes in, because he loves what he's doing, but he's working with people that doesn't like him. Whereas, and when you go out on tissue procurement, you have the person in charge and you have the two techs. So he has to always go out with those people, or there's more than 3 tissue procurements, but he always has to go out with a team. When he does it by himself, it's liberating because he doesn't have somebody harnessing him in. He can do whatever he wants. That's why he loved stalking people, because he didn't have those confines.
Right. When you have a character like this, how do you keep moving his story forward? I know you put up the second book in the series. How do you grow a character like this and keep a series going?
Well, Ben will not grow because
that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, he's the type where, he is so hurt and demented because of that hurtness. I don't see him changing, except in book 2, and it's a minor thing. He was scared, and something happened, and one of the antagonists come in, and he wasn't scared anymore, and the antagonist wanted to know why. Small stuff like that, yes, but for the basic personality, I don't want it to change. As far as the progression of the storyline, this is very interesting, Hank. I happened to ask friends on the first book before I rewrote the first book, I should say, because it's totally different than the first book. I said to friends at work and posted online, who wants to be killed off in my book? I got so many responses, I had to whittle them down. And the second thing happened in book 2. And I asked my friends and people that I'm friends with on social media, look, there's only one stipulation. I want to use your real name. I've only switched jobs on 2 of them because it was medically based. So I base it on those people's personalities for the storyline. So if there is a third book, because people at work are coming up to me and saying, hey, why didn't I get killed off in your book and stuff like that, so it may be a third. And there's one particular nurse, I'm not going to name her, I'm not going to call her out, but she goes, what the heck, why didn't you kill me off? I was like, so-and-so, you're a biker chick. You would probably be able to kick Ben's butt. That's why you're not in the book.
I love it. Oh, it's so funny because, as writers, finding these characters can be some of the most fun and the most creative times that a writer can have, because it's so out of the ordinary. And people that write darker stuff are usually the nicest, sweetest people. It's so weird. You think that if you write dark stuff, then you're probably a horrible person deep down. And no, it's exactly the opposite. It gives people this chance to kind of be free and to look at things that are not normal and to kind of have a little fun with it, to kind of poke fun at it, joke about it a little bit. There's something weird about, dark horror kind of things and comedy that go hand in hand. And I've never quite understood that, but it's absolutely real. But from the reader's point as well, like you said, who wants to be killed? And everybody's like, me. And it really lets us kind of let our hair down and explore things that we would never do.
And that's very interesting because one of the nurses that asked to be killed off, I'm not going to mention who but she is in the book. She goes, "Why don't you kill me off?" I was like, "Are you serious? You're one of the most timid people I've ever met." She goes, "George, what I display here is not necessarily who I am." I was like, "Okay, all right, I can use that."
Right.
And it's really interesting. The same doctor I was mentioning before that asked me to kill him off with dignity, which he said I did a good job. He went up to me the other day and he goes, "George, did I ever invite you over my house?" I was like, "No. Why?" He goes, "You described my house to a T. You described the gas station. You described the gas station down the road to a T, and you described something I do at home to a T. And are you stalking me?" I was like, "Doctor, I made all that stuff up." He said it was eerie.
Oh, that's so funny. That is so funny. Oh, man. So the second Blind to Blood is out. Is there more story for Ben to come?
I am thinking there is. I just don't want to saturate it because I don't want to saturate it too soon. I just published 2. And actually, Blind to Blood 2 took me a year to write, which is unusual for me. Usually it's much quicker. But I wrote it, and then I sent it to the editor, and she goes, "George, the first Blind to Blood book, I couldn't put it down. I was not going to make dinner. Second book, all right, I'm going to put this down and make dinner." I was like, all right, I'm rewriting this. So I had to rewrite like 80% of it to make it a little more exciting, I guess, if you would.
Love it. Well, speaking of, shifting gears and writing the projects that come to you that you love and having different things that get you excited. You also published, I think last night when we're recording this, you published a collection of little stories about you and your daughter. Tell us about that.
My daughter is a trip. She's the only child, and from age 4 or 5, I noticed some of the conversation she's had it made me laugh and made me think. So I just started jotting them down, and I said, you know what, I'm just going to post these on Facebook, see what happens. And it's grown to like a small fan base. Like every time I post something based on Caris, I get all these responses. So I figured I'd compile them and put them into a book form. For example, she's 13, but for example, when she was 9 or 10, she asked if she could be my boss. I was like, no. She goes, can I be God's boss? No. Can I marry God? I said, then you'll be his boss. No. And that's something mine. Some of the conversation at 7, she wanted to be my manager for my writing career. She told me about recently, which I posted about, I was repeating everything my wife said, and Caris goes, "Stop mansplaining." I was like, what's mansplaining? I'm being introduced to all these new terms that the teenagers use because my daughter's one of them. And I'm older. I had her when I was 43 and my wife was 33. So this is new to me. Even at 13, it's uncharted waters. It's very interesting.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. So what's the name of that book?
Conversations with Caris, Caris.
Conversations with Caris. I am going to go pick up a copy of that here in just a minute. That's hilarious. George, I'm a big fan of what you do. If people are just learning about you and are intrigued by the stories we've told today, where can they find you online?
It's www.amazon.com/author/George Kramer.
Excellent. We'll put a link to it in the show notes, and also you're very active on Facebook. Can people connect with you there?
Yes. I don't have the URL, but all you have to do is look up George Kramer, and I have pictures of my fantasy book. So
excellent. I'll put a link to your Facebook as well. George, thanks so much for taking time to come on the show today. I wish you much success with the new book launches.
Thank you very much for having me, Hank.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
No use crying over spilled milk. Eliza hated that cliché. She'd grown up a cliché, her life a bowl of cherries, duck soup, easy as pie, child's play behind a white picket fence. Mother had been the Wyatt Earp of clichés, firing them off quick draw. A rotten apple spoils the barrel. Smile and the world smiles with you. Every dog has his day. Children should be seen and not heard. She believed them all, particularly this last. Eliza obliged, preferring to wander the streets of Wytheville, Virginia, on her own lonesome terms. The divorce left Laura a spinster librarian, and one false step on icy stairs left her an invalid as well. The accident happened on New Year's Eve, 1950. Laura had just locked the doors of Wytheville Public Library. We must make black-eyed peas tomorrow, Laura had been thinking, with turnip greens. That ensured a lucky new year, and if you swept some money over your threshold, a prosperous one, too. She loved those old Southern traditions. She looked both ways, checking for Negroes, but turned to heel on the icy marble of the stairs and fell into the bushes below, breaking the long bones in both legs. Eliza had taken advantage of her mother's absence. She'd lost her virginity that same night. She'd swept Ron Partridge over her threshold, initiating her own beloved tradition. She was nursing a hangover, giddily reliving the event. But around 8:30 she realized that her mother had not come down to breakfast. She checked her mother's bedroom, found it empty, took the bus down to the library, climbed the high stairs, knocked hard on the library doors, and heard a groan below. Laura lay under the William Penn barberry bushes, below the yellow-trimmed windows of the non-fiction section. Her white stockings ran Jezebel red with blood. Sweat and melted snow had soaked her blouse, and her gray forehead blazed. The broken bones didn't kill Laura Merrick. She lay in the hospital, wheezing, her legs mortared up in casts. She had few visitors after the first week. Her church group was glad to fret over a poor thing for a day or two, but they trickled away when Laura had the bad manners to linger. On Valentine's Day, as her mother slept, Eliza drew big, sloppy hearts on her casts. Laura harumphed when she woke and insisted on keeping her legs hidden beneath blankets afterwards. But in late March, something miraculous happened. Laura's self-control dropped. She ranted at nurses, spit at doctors, swore like a Navy pilot dropping F-bombs on Hiroshima. She had dementia, the doctors said. Eliza decided that her mother had just stopped believing her own bullshit. The spells continued over the next 2 weeks, and Eliza enjoyed her mother's company for the first time. They swapped bawdy jokes, ogled the handsome interns, and chattered like best girlfriends late into the evening. They had long conversations, and Laura spoke her own mind in her own words about things that mattered to her. It broke Eliza's heart when the prim, condescending librarian returned. Laura hardly acknowledged anything that had passed between them. The clichés returned. You can't have your cake and eat it too. A leopard doesn't change its spots. Nothing is certain except death and taxes. This last proved true. On April 15th, Laura Merrick marked her Bible with a tongue depressor, set it on her nightstand, leaned back against the headboard, and coughed blood down the front of her nightdress. Eliza found her that way, dead as the proverbial doornail, and yes, the blood was thicker than water, just as her mother had always said. Much thicker than water, in fact, perhaps as thick as molasses in January.